Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone here and everyone there. This is Cowboy Writers and Illustrators Alliance. I forgot the name of our group. I didn't really that. Anyway, October 10th meeting, we have Laura Drake from the Permian Basin Bookies here. Rita award-winning Laura Drake. That's a big deal. If you are familiar with the romance writing industry, that's like the Oscars for romance writers. So that's an impressive accomplishment that she has. And she's going to be speaking to us in a little bit about strengthen your work, strengthen your writing. And we're going to get lots of good information out of her. So stay tuned for that. I want to welcome everyone here. Welcome everyone who's on the who's watching this. Hopefully you have discovered our YouTube channel by now. We have everything we have done pretty much up to this point. We have the former presentations, the one we had last month with Jody Thomas. We have the one the month before that. We have interviews with the people who entered our Battle of the Bards contest. So there's lots of good information out there and lots of inspiration for authors and for illustrators. Just a note about upcoming meetings. Next month, Barbara Brannon is going to be here. Barbara is one of the founders of the original Caprock Writers group. She's the author of fiction and nonfiction. She's a publisher. She's a researcher. She's a graphic designer. She has owned publications, I think several newspapers. So anything related to writing and publishing, she's done it. So she's going to be a great presentation next month. So stick around for that. And I also wanted to let you know about an opportunity here in Lubbock for writers and artists. The Voices of East Lubbock is a 2-day event on November 13th and 14th for art, music, poetry, and literature. Join us in highlighting artistic and creative talents from individuals who have lived or currently live in the eastern portion of Lubbock. Voices of East Lubbock is an event to highlight the creative talent within our neighborhood and to promote local talent that often we go unrecognized. So if you're an artist, a musician, or a writer, you can submit your work to be presented at the event to eastlubbocarthouse@gmail.com with the subject line Voices of East Lubbock along with your address. You have to have either lived in East Lubbock or live there currently. There'll be a raffle. There's, like I said, a 2-day event. Access to the East Lubbock Art House Library and free books. Refreshments. Please wear masks. Observe social distancing. But that's a fun event that's available here in town. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Drake.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. I'm going to talk today about tips I've amassed that I think will help strengthen your writing the most. But first, before you decide whether you're going to trust what I tell you, you need to know who I am, right? I am Laura Drake. I wrote 3 books in 15 years and had 417 agent rejections before I got an agent and finally sold. But there are good things about being stubborn in spite of what my husband says. That book went on to be sold in a minor bidding war to Grand Central, Hachette, and went on to double final in the Rita Award, RWA's Oscars, and won the Best First Book for 2014. That was 6 years ago, and I've written 12 books total now. Well, 12 are out in the world, in romance and women's fiction. But I often thought that those lessons, those hard-learned lessons along the way, are a waste if I'm the only one that learns from them. So I like to teach, with the hopes that you'll walk away today with at least one new thing that will help strengthen your writing. Okay, if you can flip the slide. The first thing I'm going to go over is a couple of macro tips, big picture tips, things that are big chunks of your writing. And hopefully I'll put it in a way that'll make it easy for you to edit. Steve Allman said, "All readers come to fiction as willing accomplices to your lies. Such is the basic goodwill contract made the moment we pick up a work of fiction." And all of us know that feeling, right? We're readers first, where you open a book and the very first page, you are sucked into this world and you're just dying to follow these characters on their journey. To the point where the kids come in at 6 and ask what's for dinner, and you didn't even think about it. I'm not the only one who's done that, right? We all want to write a book like that, right? But how do you do it? Where do you begin? Let's talk about beginnings first. We all have a book in our heads when we start. And if you're anything, I'm a pantser. So the only thing I have when I start usually is a character. And this is my very favorite part of the writing process because it's in my head and that book is perfect. I haven't seen any of the plot holes or any of the problems I'm going to fall into along the way. And frankly, that book in my head is not realistic anyway. The character, I know everything about their backstory. I know their dog's name from when they were 5. But 98% of that doesn't go into the book anyway. And if you're anything like me, once you start writing, you realize you didn't know as much as you thought you knew before you started. So the hard part is, where do you start? Where do you begin your book? Believe me, it's not an easy thing. My very second book, the pressure was on, right? I sold in a 3-book deal, and the first one was so successful, now I've got to do it again. It was a book called Nothing Sweeter, and I wrote the first chapter, and I took it to my critique group, and I read it to them, and they said, "We don't care." And I went, okay. So I went home and started somewhere else. Took it in the next week, and they said, "We don't care." I was thinking about getting violent when they finally said, "We don't care about the story until we care about the character." And that was a watershed moment for me. It's about the character, stupid. Okay, so if you'll change the slide. I'll show you an example from one of my favorite books. If you haven't read the book, you've seen the movie, Hunger Games, right? Think about that very first scene where we meet Katniss. What do we learn about her in that first scene that makes us care about who she is and want to follow her on this crazy journey? Anybody? Why do you care about Katniss in the first scene? She's poor, right? It's clear that she lives in a very gray world. If you click it once. Okay, anything else that you can remember from that first scene? Go ahead.
Well, she's connected to her family.
Yes, she loves her family. Even her mother, who it's clear from the beginning she doesn't respect, right? I'll click it again. Okay, anything else you can think of about Katniss? She cares about her community. Remember, she brought that dead squirrel to the old lady? Go ahead and click it again. She helps others. And then the last one. And then, of course, the most important, right? She saves her sister from what is basically a death sentence. How could you not want to follow that character and find out what happens to her? One more time. How would you feel about Katniss if she went in the Hunger Games just for the fame and the fortune and the money of it? Whole different scenario, right? Characters are the most important thing in the beginning of a book. Now, people can say, obviously, plot is important. Look at The Hobbit, right? He starts on this massive journey that follows like 4 or 5 or 6 books if you take the less well-known ones that his son wrote. But you've got to get to a character pretty quickly. One of my favorite authors, Pat Conroy, in The Prince of Tides, started his book, My Wound is Geography. It's also my anchorage, my port of call. What follows is basically 10 pages of description and backstory. Although I wouldn't recommend doing it unless you can write as good as Pat Conroy. Rest in peace. I'm still not over his death. He was an amazing author. Okay, so I have a couple of terms for different types of beginnings, and I totally made them up. Soft beginnings. Like The Prince of Tides, it starts reflective and puts a mood and has descriptions. A hard beginning, in media res, right? You've heard that term. Start in the middle. A car crash, a space battle, a disaster, either personal or societal. Or the last one is what I call a movie beginning, because so many movies use it, and there's a reason they do. You start with a scene in the beginning, and it may be even while the credits are rolling, that show the character as his life is before anything happens. And usually you get a feel for what's wrong with his life or what he's unhappy with at the same time. Then the movie really begins and change starts to happen, and he gets thrown into a situation. And many times at those movies, at the end, they have a mirror scene that shows the character in the same type of scene as the beginning. And what it does is spotlight how he has changed. And that's a really good beginning as well. Think about Titanic with Rose at the very beginning, at the very first scene. You get a pretty good idea of what her problem is, right? Her fiance. So where you begin, all of those beginnings work. And I've used them all. But I'd make the case that you want to get to an interesting character, even if, pretty quickly, even if your setting is a character. Like A Perfect Storm, setting was character there. But you need to care about the characters who are thrown into it. So you'll want to get to a warm body pretty quickly. But the main thing is begin the story as late as you can. Okay, novels are about change, right? That is why they're interesting to us, why we never get tired of watching them. Think about Scarlett O'Hara, Gone with the Wind. You may not be like her, you may not even like her, but you follow that character for more than 1,000 pages because she's interesting. What are some of your favorite book beginnings and why? Think about one of your favorite books. I'll bet the beginning is pretty amazing. Go ahead.
Outlander, where she's the World War II nurse and reunited with her husband, and they kind of have just finally come back together.
That's a great example. I love the Thornbird's beginning. You get a feel for who the character is and what she wants really quickly. Anybody else?
Ringworld by Larry Niven. It's science fiction where you got this guy who's celebrating his 200th birthday by hopping through these transport booths around the world so his birthday will last 24 hours. And the government pulls him out in transit and shows him a picture of a star with his band. And there's a ring, an artificial ring around it, and they want him to go investigate it.
Oh,
It
interesting.
won several major awards. The book is like 50 years old, but it swept the awards that year.
It sounds wonderful because it puts you into a new world, gives you the rules right away, and gives you an interesting character to follow. Those three things will be an amazing beginning every time. Excellent. The next big chunk I want to go over is backstory. Does that help? Is that better? Good. Backstory is a crucial part of every book. It deepens your characters and it lends credence to the fact that they are real, live, breathing people that have an existence outside the word on the page. Never discount backstory. It can be so powerful. And yet, it has such a bad rep, right? I mean, there are a lot of workshops. I give a workshop just on backstory. And I think it's because authors tend to treat backstory mechanically. Oh, the reader needs to know why the character reacts this way, so let me have a flashback that shows. That's not necessarily the way to handle it. If you handled backstory like we see it in real life, it'd be a lot more compelling. For example, a 7-year-old girl sits watching a beauty pageant intently. She's big for her age and slightly plump. She has frizzy hair and wears black rimmed glasses. She studies the show earnestly. Then, using a remote, she pauses, lifts her hand and mimics Miss America's waving style. Then she rewinds and starts all over again. That's one paragraph. Isn't it powerful, though? In one paragraph, you found out who this character is, what they want, and why they can't have it. Very powerful. See, what's important about backstory isn't the event. It isn't what happened to the character. It's what they took away from it. If any of you have siblings and you start talking about memories, you realize pretty quickly your sibling might have been there for the exact same thing happening, but took away something different from it. It's like a pair of eyeglasses. I've got my prescription, you've got yours. And the prescription is what happened to you your entire life and what you believed about what happened from it. I'm going to use one of my favorite films to illustrate. Everybody's seen this, I hope. Good Will Hunting. I believe that every writer should have to watch that movie because it's brilliant storytelling. First scene, we meet Will Hunting, a stereotypical bad boy, blue-collar guy from the wrong side of the tracks, right? Nothing special there. He's got a crappy job of a janitor, but it's at Harvard. And he stops in the middle of mopping a floor in the first scene to solve a theoretical math problem on the board. How could you not want to know more about that character? It's just, and the fact that authors didn't write it, the actors did, just blows me away. Backstory was the spine, the foundation of that entire movie. Will Hunting has anger issues, right? He's in therapy for the entire movie. But when do you find out where the anger issues came from? Anybody remember? It's not a flashback. It's not a huge soliloquy. It's 5 lines shouted in an argument with his girlfriend at almost the end of the movie. and it raised the hair on my arms. That movie taught me that the reader doesn't need to know anywhere near as much backstory as you think they do. By the time they told us where his anger issues came from, we were dying to know what they were, right? If you withhold and let it explode on the page, it can be much more powerful. Okay. Go back. Some of you brought 5 chapters. Look in the first 3 chapters of your work in progress. Pull out any flashbacks. In fact, I don't even have flashbacks in the first half of my book. And I have a rule that I'm not allowed any more than 5 pages of flashbacks in my entire book. Now, I might break it up into 2 pages here and 3 pages there. They're not anywhere near as important as you think they are. And they can be bad. Because a flashback or telling the reader backstory stops the forward momentum of your book for a trip to the past. You don't want to do that in the first 3 chapters of your book when you're trying to capture the reader's attention about what's happening today. You see what I'm saying about that? It can do the opposite of what you think. And honestly, as a reader, very seldom do you need as much backstory as the author thinks you need. So I'm not saying not to use backstory, but usually it works better to hint that there is backstory, not to actually tell it, especially in the beginning. Those are my macro tips, and those are frankly the hardest because it's not like you can go through Word and do a find for backstory. It's harder, it takes more work. But let's move on to smaller things. Micro tips. These are small things, but they can make a huge difference in your writing. First thing we'll talk about is advanced POV. Not going to get into first person, third person, but you've noticed nowadays the word is close POV, right? In the last 15 years, maybe 20 years, close POV has gotten very popular. YA authors started it. And I believe that there's a really good reason for that. We were all raised with TV, right? Nobody's older than I am here. We had movies as a kid. Nowadays, kids are, raised on Netflix and Hulu, and games are even immersive. Everything is immersive nowadays. You don't want to read about a hobbit going on a journey. You want to be the hobbit, or you want to be with him on the journey. Close POV is very powerful. And there's some easy ways to make your POV closer. Here's the difference. First of all, you need to cut filter words. And mostly that is the senses. See, hear, touch, feel, taste. Here's the difference. He saw the train heading for the car on the tracks. How much more compelling is the train barreled towards the car on the tracks? In the second, we're seeing the scene through the character's eyes. Now, the hard part is, as authors, to write that, we have to be in the character's head in order to be able to do it convincingly, right? If you're not used to writing this way, it may seem daunting. But POV in the beginning, when you first started writing, was daunting, right? Head hopping and all that. It just blew my mind in the beginning. But after a while, you get it and you write that way. It's the same way with close POV. Okay, also, besides the sentence, so the easy way to do it is do a find in Word for seen, saw, smelled, whatever. You don't need them. Go back and edit most of them out. Filter words. I see these a lot as well, even in published books. Words that don't need to be there. For example, he turns to my sister, who nods her head in agreement. We all know a nod is agreement, right? You don't need it. I'm not saying the reader is going to read that and put down the book. Of course they're not. But there's so much about reading that is subconscious. And if you do that enough, the reader may just remember that they've got a load of laundry they've got to throw in the dryer and never pick the book back up again. Okay? Little things like that add up. I rub my eyes, then open them and look around the gym. Rub your eyes. Then if you just describe something in the gym, we know that you opened them. You don't need to say it. Again, they're small things. A light came on next door, drawing his attention. How much closer POV is it? A light came on next door, giving him a window into his neighbor's world. He heard the crack of gunshots. Gunshots shattered the quiet night. When she turned her head, she saw the car fishtailing down the road. You can also use this to add depth. The car squealed and fishtailed down the street. Was it something I said? You can add humor. You can give us more information about your character this way. It's not to say that filter words are always bad. Sometimes you can use them to spotlight things that you want the reader to pay attention to. I heard the dryer. I heard the muffled sound of the traffic outside. What I didn't hear was the baby crying. See how powerful that can be? Okay, pull out your 5 pages, if you have them, and look for a sentence where you have a sense or a distant POV and see if you can write it a little bit closer. Or if you've got filter words, extra words you really don't need, rewrite that sentence. If you don't have pages with you, write a sentence wrong to begin with. Write it with senses or extra words in, and then edit it out. Give you a couple of minutes to do that. Did y'all find anything? I hope so. If you didn't, I'm doing this for naught. You guys are all awesome. I do this too, by the way. I have to go back and filter all that stuff out. Anybody got one you want to share?
I have one here. I sighed and turned around to see who had spoken, and I gently placed the gold back in the pot where I'd taken it. I could just say I just turned around instead of saying
Yep. And again, it seems small, but once you get used to doing it, you'll notice it all the time in published books. It makes me crazy.
That's the problem with learning how to write well. It ruins your reading enjoyment sometimes.
It does, that's true.
It all seemed so easy when we were readers, didn't it?
Anybody else?
I have one I Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so it's 2 lines. They're in a middle school, walking down the hallway. They're grown-ups in middle school. And a man actually said, I love this. I wish I could go back to middle school. Really? This is the original. Really, I asked? Middle school had been a nightmare for me. And I just cut it to really, and then thinking of, in a way. Something like that.
It does.
Not the backstory without the computer words.
That's excellent. I'll be spotlighting something else later that shows that as well. Excellent. You're trusting your reader to get it, because we've all been to middle school, right? Okay, another thing that you see all the time and is dialogue tags. People say they're invisible, but they're not to me. They are like Chinese water torture until I just want to throw the book across the room. Don't get me wrong, you may need a dialogue tape. Obviously, if you have 2 women in a scene, you can't always use the she pronoun. You may have to use their name, or you may have to say, Donna said. But I would make the case that you can make your writing meatier by adding something to it instead of a tag. This is a real easy one to edit too. Just do a find for said. That's your first one. There may be more, but my mentor, Margie Lawson, if y'all heard about her, you may have went to the writer's workshop when she was there. She took me from good to sold, and I just totally believe in what she teaches. Lawson Writers Academy is where she teaches online. She calls them dialogue cues. It shows you the way the character is saying it, instead of just, he said is so generic. For example, I don't know what you mean, she said. It becomes, she fluttered her eyelashes. I don't know what you mean. Adds a lot more, right? It shows you a non-POV character. It gives you how they're saying it. So it gives you a window into that non-POV character's feelings. And y'all know not to use adjectives and adverbs in tags, right? Sure sign of a beginner. It just kills me. I don't know what you mean, she said disarmingly. You see how that's telling instead of showing, as the eyelash flutter did. There's another one. Margie Lawson calls it being true to the character's emotional set. I'm not sophisticated enough to even know what that is. I call it be the dude, okay?
It's a little different.
If you're gonna convince the reader that they're in the character's head, you have to write from within that character's head, okay? It's part of close POV again. For example, here's an example. There's been a train wreck, okay? It's nighttime, there's a fire, and it's snowing. Now, what you show and what you highlight is going to be different depending on who your character is. Think about it. What if you were the conductor and you've been drinking? You wake up alongside of the tracks, you're going to have a way different feeling than a mother who had a child with her and the child isn't there. A woman who's engaged to be married. A homeless person who's homeless because they lost their house in a fire. You can see how those emotions that are evoked by it are totally different depending on who it is that's the character. Keep that in mind when you're writing from the inside out. One of my favorite characters ever created is Scarlett O'Hara. Again, you may not like her, but we follow her through the whole book or the whole movie because we get who Scarlett is. We may not be at all like her, but she's quintessentially Scarlett all the time. That's why I didn't have a hard time with that ending. It was Scarlett. She closes the door, Rhett tells her to go to hell, basically, and she sobs for a moment, and then she pulls it together and sets out to decide how she's going to get Rhett back. That is a great character because she's always true to who she is. Okay? That is being the dude. You want to switch to the next slide? Okay, conveying tension is really important in a novel. And I found two totally opposite ways that work to convey tension. First of all, if you slow down time. I lied. Speeding up time first. Another trick to suck a reader in and glue them into the page is to display the emotion on the page the way you feel it inside. For example, if you are panicking, you have broken thoughts. Some of them may not even make sense. They are broken also with what's going on around you, and you may change your mind at the last second depending on what's going on. You need to write that way to convey the tension. Here's an example from one of my books. It's a woman who knows how to ride a motorcycle, has been riding a motorcycle, but her friend gets bit by a rattlesnake, and she has to ride her down a mountain on a motorcycle. She's never done this before. These are her thoughts. Easy, easy. Come on the throttle slow. Keep the shifts gentle. Her grip's about to strangle my stomach, but better that than slower. God, this sucker rides like a dump truck, 2 up. Lean, not that much. Shit, that was close. She's staying right behind me, but still the weight exaggerates everything. Maybe if I speed up just yeah, that helps. The bike wants to stay up. All I need to do is dear, braking. Go, mama, get out of the friggin' road. Cloudcroft. Good thing I didn't count on help here. It's not much more than a couple of tourist shops and a gas station. Don't you do it, damn cage driver. Don't you see me? Shit, easy, easy, more damn curves. Only 20 more miles, but we've got to get out of these damn twisties. It's taking too long. So if you go through your work in progress and pick up your key scenes, black moments, tension, things that are happening, and break up the thoughts and speed up the action, it will suck the reader through that scene fast. My favorite authors, I can't read fast enough because I want to know what happens next. The opposite, if you can flip this thing for me, KJ, thanks, is to slow it down. In key scenes where you want the reader to really pay attention, slow down time. I did that in my book, women's fiction, Days Made of Glass, where Harley, this girl, jumps a fence to save a dog from a charging bull. No way she'd make it to the fence. The sweet rush of adrenaline hit her like a heroin mainlining junkie. It sang through her veins, lifting her, making her superhuman. She sped up, heart thundering in her ears, or maybe that was the bull's hooves. Everything seemed to slow. Details stood out in perfect focus, the shine of spit on the dog's bared teeth, the whirl of hair at the center of the bull's forehead, a small scar next to his white-filled eye. In full stride, she reached the center of the arena, snatched the now cowering furball by the nape, and kept moving. The ground shook with pounding hooves. She tensed her muscles for impact, but felt only the sliding rub of a horn on her butt and the rush of air at her back as the bull passed. Clutching the suicidal mutt in a death grip, she sprinted for the fence. This was a key scene because it's where the protagonist found her career. So I wanted to convey the massive tension, and yet, you know how it is when you're almost in a car accident, right? Somebody comes out from nowhere and you just miss it. Remember how things slow down? Panic can sometimes also slow things down. So either one works. Okay, my next tip, and you can flip it. Whoa, can you back up one? There you go. Trust your reader. As authors, we have a hard time judging just when the reader will get what we're trying to say. And you've probably seen it a lot where the author goes too far. We get it way quicker than the author thinks we do. If you're not in a critique group, you need to get into one because we'll never be able to judge that for ourselves. You need somebody from the outside telling you, you're going on, I got it. Because there's nothing, I don't think, besides misspelling and using punctuation wrong, that irritates a reader faster because they feel like you think they're too stupid to get it. Which in reality, it's usually the author not being sure of themselves. They don't think they said it strongly enough the first time. And you'll see it sometimes where an author will say something, they'll go down a ways, say something again about that same thing, and circle back. Where I think the fix is going back to that first sentence or that first paragraph and strengthening that instead of circling back. There's a couple of ways that authors don't trust readers. Say it once and say it well. This is that circling thing. This first. Sean looks over from where he's heaving junk out of the closet. Seriously? We have a house full of stuff to get rid of and you want to keep old newspaper clippings? Just trash them. Then, a few lines later, do I have to beg you? Please, ditch the newspaper clippings. Okay? The reader, trust your reader will know it's about why he's irritated. That is your example exactly, where you didn't need to tell that she'd been to junior high or it was a bad experience because you would assume that the reader would know. Brilliant. Tell us what we don't know. I see this a lot too, where in thoughts, the author is just going over something the reader already knows. It slows the read and it irritates the reader after a while. Again, it may be subconscious, but they may set the book down. Here's an example. This guy is a legend in his own mind. I've seen some crap in my day, but he dishes it out by the shovelful. Here's the dialogue line. I'm so impressed with your body of work, sir. Thought. I'm good with diplomacy. My thoughts, another thing entirely. Do you see how that last line is completely unnecessary? And it's almost like explaining a joke to someone. It goes on too long. Telling and then showing. See this a ton too. And it's usually because we're not sure we got it across right to begin with. And again, it may seem small, but it can get irritating. In this example, the author just described a snow-covered scene outside. A chill seeped through the glass. Becky rubbed her goose-bumped arms. We know goosebumps are from being cold. If you've described the snow, you don't need to say that chill seeped through the glass. That's telling the goosebumps are showing. Showing is almost always better than telling. Not always, but usually. Going over the top. I know social media, everybody uses at least 3 exclamation points. I do it too, but not in a novel. I have another rule. I make a lot of rules for myself. No more than 10 exclamation points per book. And I try and keep it closer to 5. Seems impossible? It's not. Go do a find in your work in progress, and I'm sure you're going to find a lot more than 10. Because it's lazy. Honestly, lazy writing. And you're stealing the power. Everybody's seen one of those gritty inner city cop movies, right? Where they are swearing every single sentence. Now, I don't have a problem with swearing at all. Some people do. I don't. But by the end of the movie, I can guarantee you, you don't even hear the swear words anymore because you're immune to them. If you overuse them and use them when you don't need them, you're not going to have that power for when you really need it. So go do a find for exclamation points and maybe swearing. I've been known to swear a time or two myself. Less is more. So analyze it. Once you find them, if you feel like you need it, fine. But I make the case that most of the time it isn't that you need an exclamation point, it's that you need to rewrite the sentence so it's more compelling. Because an exclamation point is really telling, right? It's telling the reader, this is exciting. And if your sentence is good enough, you shouldn't have to tell them. This is true of all strong emotion. Save it for your key scenes and when you want the reader to really pay attention. Adverbs. I am adverb adverse. I'll admit it. I think they're way overused. And you, don't get me wrong, you can go to published books and find a quadzillion of them. But I think you can do better. In a quick-paced action scene, an adverb may be all you have time to do. And that's absolutely fine. But some people use one per sentence, and that's just lazy. Let me give you an example from my own writing. She quickly hopped into the bed of the truck as the cattle trotted up, curious. First of all, it's wrong. You can't hop quickly. You're in the air for most of it, right? You can't control the speed. And secondly, I don't think you lose a thing by taking that word out. It's very clear without it. Do a find in your 5 pages and in your work in progress for ly. Those are adverbs. Go back and just analyze the sentence and see if you can write it without it. Let me give you an example. The nostalgia was quickly laced with fibers of sadness and loneliness. That's not a bad sentence, right? But if you think about it a minute, caustic threads of melancholy laced through her nostalgia, eating through her good memories. Stronger, right? The exception is always stylistic choice. If you want to go over the top on purpose, an adverb's the quickest and easiest way to do it. No response, which on several levels was probably a good thing. This room must have been a dump for every marginally useful piece of junk from the last 20 years. If you want to go over the top, adverbs are the way to go. Bloated writing. I'm weird, you probably realize that by now. But I will go to a paragraph and analyze every single word in it to see if I really need it. What happens is it unbloats your writing, it puts your writing on a diet, and what it does is it makes it more powerful. Less is often better than more. Here's one that there's another reason, because again, remember the level of detail you use is a clue to your reader, pay attention. She shut down the computer game, closed out of her multiple open windows, then turned off the mouse and pushed back from the desk. We don't need to know all that. We've all done that, right? If you go into that level of detail on things that don't matter, your reader isn't going to believe you when you go into detail because you want them to pay attention. You'll lose your reader. Okay. Songwriters do this all the time. Nothing is better than country music to explain that. In a couple of stanzas and a chorus, they give you an entire story, right? Be more like a songwriter. Originality. Have you ever read something in a book and you read it and say, oh my God, I know just what that feels like, but I've never heard it said that way before? Jodi Picoult is one of my favorite authors, and she does that several times a book. You have to stop afterwards and just go, whew, because it's so good. Here's from the prologue of The 10th Circle, Jodi Picoult. This is how it feels when you realize your child is missing. The pit of your stomach freezes fast while your legs go to jelly. I would stop right there. She doesn't. There's a single blue bass thud of your heart. The shape of her name, sharp as metal filings, gets caught between your teeth, even as you try and force it out in a shout. Fear breathes like a monster in your ear. Where did I see her last? Would someone have taken her? Could she have wandered away? And then, finally, your throat seals shut as you swallow the fact that you just made a mistake you'll never be able to fix. Gives me shivers even now. Key scenes, important points. Spend the time. Think about, sit with the emotion you're trying to convey. That's what I usually do. What does it feel like inside? What are your muscles doing? What is your stomach doing? What does this remind you of? Right from inside the character's head out. And you don't get overwhelmed. You don't have to do this everywhere. Just your key scenes. I would say maybe 3 or 4 a book. Cadence. In writing, it's a sense of rhythm and pace. Jodi Picoult's, I just read, part of it was she chose S words. That conveyed the cadence. Where is it? Her name, sharp as metal filings, gets caught between your teeth. See how it just kind of rumbles along? And she does that by the consonants she chose. It's a tempo to the sentences. Songwriters have it down.
Do you think reading poetry would help in this?
Poetry helps a lot.
I'm a big fan of Robert E. Howard, and he created Conan, among other things. Conan was a small part output, but that's what he's known for. And he wrote a volume of collected poetry that's that thick. And if you read his stuff out loud, there is often a rhythm and a cadence to it that you may not catch
Exactly.
reading silently. So that's why I'm bringing this up, because I've heard that described as how some of his writing is so good in places. It's because of the poetry influence, because his mother read poetry when he was little.
Exactly.
Okay.
And thank you for bringing that up, because reading it out loud is where you'll hear the cadence, right? Okay. I have the guts to embarrass myself, and you're going to help me. Blame it all on my roots. I showed up in boots and ruined your black tie affair. The last one to know, the last one to show. I was the last one you thought you'd see there. And I saw the surprise and the fear in his eyes when I took his glass of champagne. And I toasted you, said, honey, we may be through, but you'll never hear me complain, 'cause I got friends in no places, right? That is cadence. Again, nothing's better than country music for that. But read your words out loud to hear the cadence and to work the cadence. This is one of my favorites from Tom Robbins. It was in the ending to Jitterbug Perfume. The lesson of the beat, then, is hold your divine blush, your innate rosy magic, or end up brown. Once you're brown, you'll find out you're blue, as blue as indigo. And you know what that means. Indigo, indigoing, indigone. That guy's awesome. I've never written anything that good. But spend the time and it'll pay off. Okay, authorly words. Especially when we start writing, we tend to do it, right? We want to impress everybody with our grammar, with our vocabulary. But you know what? You never need it. Neil Gaiman, his American Gods, they analyzed it for what grade level it was? 4th grade. He does okay, right? Don't use bountiful if plenty will do. The reader doesn't come to your book to be educated. They come there to be entertained. So cut the authorly words. Cliches. Cliches are reader killers. And honestly, they're lazy writing too. A cliche is the first thing you think of. Go through as you're reading your book out loud. Go through and look for cliches. They will jump out at you. And they're so easy to fix. All you have to do is freshen them. You don't have to get rid of them. For example, forget it. You're slower than molasses becomes you are slower than dial-up internet. Right? He sounded madder than a hornet becomes Max said in a Donald Trump, you're fired voice. No politics. I wrote that a long time ago. It honestly doesn't take long to do, and it's kind of fun after a while. Last thing, favorite words. We all have them. If you don't know what they are yet, there is a program, and I'm not going to remember the name, maybe someone else here will, where you can put in fact, I think it's in Word, where you can get frequently used words. And of course, and that and the and there are fine. But you'll start to see other ones like up, down, back. Those need to be edited out. I know you can find them all the time in published books, but they're not necessary. One of my favorite words, oddly enough, who would believe it, jerked. You know, you jerk in surprise, or it's usually that type, not the other type of jerk. Although, never mind. You'll get to know what yours are as you go along. I have a guy in one of my crick groups. He keeps a list of his. He knows what they are. And his last editing step is to go and edit those out. That's all I got. I hope something helps you guys. Thank you. Thank you for having me.